I'll give you an example of an amazing cover-up. When David Boies started to take on Epstein's victims as clients, he brought in Stan Pottinger. And Pottinger was an associate attorney general. And I call him the Forrest Gump of cover-ups. if there's a cover-up, Stan Pottinger is there. Like with Wounded Knee, a bunch of Native Americans took over Wounded Knee, which had been the site of a slaughter. And Stan Pottinger went after them, and the two, Russell Means and Dennis Banks, were the head of the American Indian movement, and Stan Pottinger went after them really hard. But the judge found that the feds were lying about a number of different things, and he dropped all the charges against him. Stan Pottinger was also married, or a boyfriend to Gloria Steinem for like 9 years. And Steinem was a CIA asset. It's amazing that all these women that look up to Steinem and they see her as the pinnacle of women's liberation. Well, actually, she was CIA. Now, she said that she stopped getting money from the CIA in 1961, but I've come across an article that says that she she was getting money from the CIA throughout the 1960s.
Wow.
And there was, according to Ari Ben-Menashe, who was a Israeli spy.
Right.
There was, actually, Pottinger was part of the Iran-Contra cover-up. And October Surprise, are you familiar with the October Surprise?
Yes.
Okay.
There was the hostages that
yes.
Bless you. The hostages that were over there, and then they didn't want to release him until after he won the presidency.
Okay, so the CIA,
right? Is that right or no?
William Casey and George Bush made a deal with the Iranians. And they said, if you keep the hostages till after Ronald Reagan is elected president, we'll sell you cheap arms. Mm-hmm. And we were selling arms to Saddam Hussein, and he was having a war against the Iranians. So we were selling arms to both sides. Right. But that was called the October Surprise. And what's really interesting, Stan Pottinger was in on the October Surprise, according to Ari Ben-Menashe. And that was an amazing cover-up because there were actually congressional subcommittees that looked into it and concluded that it didn't exist, even though the New York Times in March published an article that said that there was an October Surprise. So finally, all these years later, but it's amazing how you can have so many congressmen driven in one way to say that there was no October Surprise when there so obviously was. But Stan Pottinger, who ended up representing these Epstein victims with David Boies, he was busted helping Iranians get arms, showing Iranians how to smuggle arms from the United States to Iran without getting in any trouble. And they had him on, this is kind of, actually, it's humorous. It's tragic, but it's humorous. Our Justice Department had tapes of him telling these Iranians how best to smuggle arms into Iran without getting busted.
Really?
And that paragon of integrity, Rudolph Giuliani, was the U.S. attorney overseeing that case, and they lost the tapes of Stan Pottinger. Now, you would think that they would come up with something more creative.
Right.
But anyway, so the tapes were lost, and Stan walked, and then he started representing all these Epstein victims. So it's very obvious that Epstein was definitely intelligence, and then intelligence assets were brought in to make sure that the cover-up was on the other side.
It seems also like it wasn't just one intelligence service. It seems like there was a ton of them. It seemed like it was a combination of CIA, Mossad, Saudi, like at least those three, right?
Well, you know, people ask me, was the Mossad involved? And I say to them, I don't know. I mean, it could have been, but here's the thing about that. There's no way the CIA is going to let the Mossad compromise American politicians on American soil without getting a cut of that intelligence.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's no way.
Well,
Because the Israelis rely on us so heavily for armaments that the Mossad and the CIA are going to work together on that. I don't think the Mossad is going to compromise American politicians.
but the Mossad is so much better than the CIA. They're so much more efficient than the CIA, and I think that's one of the things that the CIA is frustrated about.
I don't know. The CIA can be very effective. I mean, just talk to Guatemala and Chile and Indonesia, and
For sure.
It just goes on and on. I mean, when the CIA really wants to foment a coup, they get rid of guys. So and they specialize in regime changes. So the CIA can be very effective.
That's a great point. They have been very effective, but when it comes to American politics, I don't think there's anyone more effective than the Mossad. If you talk, there was a recent interview that came out with a congressman. He did it. I forget his name. You could probably find it, Steve. He did an interview with Tucker Carlson, and he was basically telling Tucker, he's like, every single one of us has a CIA or a handler from Israel. Or it was the what's the organization called? The APEC. We all have our own APEC handlers.
Yeah, I mean,
so, and then John Mearsheimer, wrote that whole book about the Israel lobby and how Israel has so much influence over our politics and our laws and everything involving our media and all this stuff, even to their own detriment.
I think that they work together. This is kind of interesting. When I was talking to Gaspipe all those years ago in his subterranean digs. The Russian mafia had this amazing scam where, a gallon of gasoline was taxed 25 cents at that point. And what the Russian mafia did was they would sell all this gasoline and they wouldn't pay the tax, and then they would declare bankruptcy. So what happened was we changed our laws where the wholesalers had to pay the tax on the gasoline instead of the retailers. And what the Russians were doing is they created a daisy chain of companies that would defer the tax and defer the tax and defer the tax. And then you'd end up with Juan Gonzalez in Tijuana that had to pay all the taxes on the gasoline. And what Gaspipe told me, and this was my first real inkling of how dirty the Mossad was, that there was a Mossad guy that was working with the Colombo family, and he shot this Colombo mafia guy in the back of the head, and then Gaspipe, because they made like $1 billion on this. It was an amazing scam. And the Russians started doing it, and then all the American crime families followed them. And so Joseph Reich, a Mossad guy, was part of this scam, and he shot a guy, I can't think of the gangster's name, and we wanted to extradite him, but Israel wouldn't do it. But then Israel tried the guy in an Israel court, and amazingly, an Israel court didn't find a Mossad guy guilty of murder.
Wow. So, who was the guy? I think we talked about this on the phone. Who was the Israeli spy who was in prison? He was in a U.S. prison, and then they tried to get Clinton. I think it was Israel tried to get Clinton to release him back to Israel. Clinton couldn't do it, and then Trump actually ended up getting him out. And then not only that, but it was the billionaire. We talked about this person on the phone. He was a billionaire who owned an NBA team. He died, and then his wife is now the one who just gave Trump $100 million. What's this person's name again?
God, I can't think of his name.
God.
Pull it up for us.
Steve, can you find who just gave Trump $100 million?
Okay, who gave Trump
$100 million?
$100 million.
It was in exchange for the liberation of Miriam Adelson. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So Miriam Adelson's husband was the one. I think he gave Trump during his first campaign like $10 million or something, and then Trump got this fucking Israeli spy out of prison and sent him back, and then literally flew the guy back on Adelson's jet.
Pardoned it.
Back to Israel.
Pardoned. Yeah.
And now Miriam Adelson just gave Trump $100 million. And one of the contingents of that $100 million was to give them liberate the West Bank or something like that, a genocide in the West Bank, essentially.
Well, it's interesting. I interviewed Ari Ben-Menashe on my podcast, and Israel tried to say he wasn't an Israeli spy, but he's definitely an Israeli spy. And actually, our government said that there was an October surprise, because he said he participated in the October surprise. He met with Pottinger, and our government said there was an October surprise, but now we're conceding that there is an October surprise.
Right.
And he's a spy, so a former spy, or maybe it's difficult to know with guys like that. But he said, but the New York Times corroborated this. The Israelis were aware of that attack for over a year. Or for around a year before it actually went down.
Wow.
And Ari Ben-Menashe told me that, and then all of a sudden the New York Times came out with an article about it. So he has been corroborated on a number of different points.